Okay, so I'm really honored to be speaking with your group today. And Brian, thank you very much for the very warm welcome that you offered. We've been friends for a number of years, so I appreciate the invitation to come and speak before your group today. I'll admit that I was sort of talking to my wife about this speaking presentation over the weekend. I was sort of going through my notes, looking at the PowerPoint, that kind of thing. And I was kind of trying to impress her a little bit, to be honest. And I said, you know, this is a big deal. It's in a big auditorium. There'll be like 300, 400 people there. She wasn't terribly impressed. You know, I said, I'll be the keynote speaker. Didn't get her that impressed. And then I said, you know, one of the past keynote speakers was Condoleezza Rice. And suddenly I had her attention a little bit. But she looked at me less being impressed, more with concern. And she said, Andy, do they know what you do? And I said, yes. She said, and they still invited you to speak before them? And I said, yes, and so I'm here, obviously. But while I don't have the resume or the track record or the record of accomplishments of a Condoleezza Rice, what I do have is a great topic to talk to you about today, which is winning the talent wars. So I'm going to guess that most of you in this audience are involved in making hiring decisions. And what you observed over the past 10 years is it's gotten much, much more difficult. The job market, the labor market is much tighter. So what I want to share with you today are kind of two things. First of all, I want to share some research that we've done. In particular, we've surveyed about 1,000 millennials, and we've asked them about how they go about choosing a job, but also how they go about choosing a location and where they want to live. So I'll share some of that. What I also want to share with you are 5 emerging best practices that we're starting to see around the country and share some success stories that come from some of those different communities from around the country. So I think it's a very timely, important discussion to have. Brian gave a nice introduction in terms of DCI, just by way of quick background. My dad did indeed start DCI back in 1960. Just to correct Brian, he was the founder. He was not a co-founder. It's by himself, but anyway. He did have a partner who came in a couple of years later that I think, Brian, you're referring to. But he started in 1960, and so for the past 58 years, we've done one thing. We've marketed places, and we've worked for cities, states, regions, and countries. And we've worked for about 500 of them. In the state of Alabama, we've worked for the state. We've worked for Mobile, we've worked for Montgomery, we've worked for Huntsville, but most importantly here, most relevant today, is our work with the BBA. And also, as Brian shared, our work has been focused on national media relations, telling favorable business stories about Birmingham through outlets like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNN, as well as telling favorable quality of life stories about the Birmingham area. So that's a little about where we're at in this. I want to switch gears back, and I want to go to this national problem. So the national talent crisis that America is experiencing today. So if you look at the unemployment rate in America today, it's 3.7%. That is the lowest it's been since 1969, when I was 8 years old. That's a long time ago. Now, as we bring it in terms of Birmingham, in terms of the Birmingham Hoover MSA, the unemployment rate here today is 3.5%. If I take you back just 9 years to January of 2009, the start of the recession, the unemployment rate was 14.4%. So in 9 years, it's gone from 14.4% down to 3.5%. That's a very, very dramatic change. So what communities around the country are having to do now, they're really having to do two things. The first, the mayor already talked about, and that's fine-tuning their workforce development programs and trying to offer truly inclusive economic development. So it helps everybody, it raises up everybody in that regard. And that's focused on looking at the talent that we already have in Birmingham and how do we train them and give people the skills that they need to succeed in tomorrow's economy. That's number one. And communities have been doing that for a long time, and they can do it better, much better. But what is new here is this area of talent attraction. You know, the BBA for years has been focused on attracting companies. How do we expand existing companies? How do we retain companies? How do we bring in new companies? And you just saw from the video, the BBA has been very successful in that. If I were speaking at your CVB's annual conference, the focus has been on attracting tourists and bringing visitors to the Birmingham region. And similarly, the CVB has been very successful at that. But what's new here is the idea of attracting talent and bringing in people not just to visit or not just people to invest, but people who are going to become residents and contribute to the economy. Whoops. So these are some of the headlines that we're seeing in that regard. And once again, you know, America is really facing a national talent crisis. So I want to introduce to you some of the research, but before I do that, I just want to deal with the word millennials for a moment here. And a lot of our research focused on that generation. That is the generation that will lift America and take America to the next stage. And I want to start with to challenge a belief that some of you, I think, may have in this room. And that belief is that the millennial generation is fundamentally different from earlier generations. So to do this, let's first of all start with the definition, make sure we're all on the same page. According to the Pew Research Center, a millennial is someone who was born between 1981 and 1996, a 16-year period. So I just want you to humor me, indulge me a little bit here. If you were born between 1981 and 1996, if you're a millennial, please stand up. Okay. Stay standing just for a moment here. It's maybe a third of the audience that we're seeing here. As you look at the audience that is standing, you look at the audience that is sitting, I don't see a fundamental difference between the two. They might be a little better fit, a little bit younger, obviously, but I don't see them as fundamentally different in this regard. Okay, you've indulged me, you can sit down. Thank you.
Just a quick question.
Go ahead, yes.
Sorry, it seems to me if we're going to talk about millennials, shouldn't you have a millennial up there presenting?
Well, I'm not a millennial. I know you probably find that all very surprising, but what do you suggest?
Do you want me to come up there and help you, or?
That would be great.
Okay.
Why don't you come on up? You know, she's already mic'd. I don't know how this happened, but anyway. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Patience Fairbrother. So Patience is indeed a millennial. You are 26 years old.
I am, that's correct.
I am a baby boomer, but a young baby boomer at the age of 57. And so I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment, but I do want to share with you my favorite generational quote, and I'll just walk you through this quickly. Today's generation loves luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders. Does anyone know who wrote that? Socrates. 470 BC, 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started here.
So it's clear from this quote that a disdain for the younger generation is nothing new. It's actually been going on for centuries. But there is a perception that millennials make decisions differently than other people. But the fact is, millennials aren't some mold-breaking generation. We're just people. And the same could be said for any generation, as you'll see up here. And in our research, which we're going to walk you through in a minute, we found little to no difference in how millennials responded than any other generation. So it's just something to keep in mind, because we know that communities like Birmingham aren't just looking for millennials. You need mid-level managers, and you need to attract and retain talent across all age ranges. But there's one thing that we can't ignore, and that's, as reported earlier this year by Pew Research, millennials have eclipsed the baby boomers as the single largest generation in the US labor force. And right behind them is Gen Z. That's about age 22 all the way down to age 6. You're not going to find a lot of 6-year-olds in the current labor pool, but they are slated to overtake even millennials as the largest generation. So for that reason, our research has really focused on these primary generations, so keep that in mind. So what did we find in our research? There were 3 main surprises that we're going to walk you through.
And we surveyed, by the way, about 1,000 millennials in this research.
Yes,
so go ahead.
exactly. Millennials and Gen Z were the focus, and it was about 1,000 of them that we surveyed. So our 3 main surprises are as follows. First, people look for job opportunities over the location of the job opportunity. Second, economic factors are the top concerns when talent is considering a relocation. And third, despite the rise of the internet, firsthand experience is still king when it comes to forming and shifting perceptions about a location. So we're gonna walk through each one of these. I'll take you through the first one. So when we asked this audience, what are the top factors behind a job decision? We were expecting to hear that the location would come out on top, but in fact, factors related to the job itself, the salary, opportunity for work-life balance, company benefits, all ranked ahead of the location itself. So this is actually good news for communities like Birmingham that have good available jobs, because it means you actually have a good chance of attracting somebody to come and live and work here if there are good jobs for them. In fact, about 57%, of our survey audience, 35 and under, said they were somewhat or extremely likely to relocate for a job in the next 5 years. So that's, it's very promising, actually.
So as we move to number 2, if you're going to let me talk again for a little bit.
I guess you can talk.
Okay. We asked also the question, when you are considering a relocation opportunity, what are the top factors that you look at? And in understanding this, I think there is one fundamental thing that is different about millennials, and particularly people who've recently graduated college. They're graduating with a diploma. They're also graduating with an average of about $37,000 in debt. So that is a fundamental shift. It's much, much higher. And what it leads you to, my God, that's up high. Okay. It leads you to look at cost factors as the number one thing. So number 1 is the cost of living in a community in a relocation decision. Number 2 is housing costs. If you look at number 5 here, a job opportunity for a spouse or partner. Those are things that come up very high. Some of the things we expected to come up quite a bit higher, like recreational opportunities, things like arts and cultural amenities. It's not saying they're unimportant, but it's saying that for this audience, they're less important in a relocation decision. So basically, economics are going to be, once again, a location is not unimportant, but economics are paramount in terms of importance.
So our third surprise was when we asked millennials and Gen Z what would be the most helpful tools in a relocation decision for you. And we were really expecting them to lean heavily on digital resources, the way that marketing is moving. But in fact, what we found is that 80% of them cited the ability to visit the location as the number 1 factor behind their location decision. So what that tells us is that if talent needs to see the place firsthand, today's visitors are really tomorrow's talent, if we can market to them properly and if we can get the message about available jobs in front of them. The next thing we did is we asked them for their top sources when they're looking for a new job. And again, we were looking to see the digital ones coming up on top, but in fact, good old-fashioned friends and family came up number 1, and this is sources behind finding a new job. So talent wants to see a place firsthand, and they want to hear about a job from a trusted source like friends and family.
So from this as our next step, what we wanted to identify and share with you all are 5 emerging, what we're calling best practices. We've already shared that there's not a lot of track record among people doing talent attraction on a community basis. So, but as we look around and sort of look around the country, 5 emerging best practices sort of emerged for us, and we're going to share with you some case studies or some points that go with each of these. I'll start it off, we'll trade on and off. Here are our 5 best practices that we want to share, or 5 ways to attract talent. So number 1, market the money. We've already shared with you that economic factors drive a lot of decisions for millennials as well as Gen Z, and that's the lens that they look at things through. So as we look at a best practice, you see a website here from Choose Atlanta or Choose ATL. I'm actually going to take you to a different one. This is a website called Say Yes to Dallas. If you get a chance to look at this, it's very, very well done. It actually features a lot of input and some videos from Mark Cuban of Shark Tank, who's a big Dallas supporter. But what I'm pointing out here is what they created is a Say Yes to Dallas cost calculator. So it allows you to plug in your community. I plugged in where I live in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and if I'm making $75,000 there, that I can basically live the same quality of life in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, and save about $11,500 a year. So it's a dramatic difference. Maybe hard to see from the back there, but The big one is the second box in. Housing costs are 29% lower. And we saw on our earlier chart that housing costs were the number 2 most important factor in considering a relocation. So that's number 1, market the money.
So strategy number 2, we know that talent is looking first for the location and second for the, first for the job and second for the location. So how employers are talking about the location is incredibly important, whether that's on their website or in person during an interview with a prospective employee. So what we're seeing smart communities do is really engage with their employers. HR reps are out there trying to sell jobs on a daily basis, and part of that is marketing the location if they're trying to get somebody to move from elsewhere. So we've seen communities putting together these HR toolkits, which are essentially all the marketing materials HR reps need to help sell the location. Their job is to sell the job and the company itself, and communities are trying to help them sell what's it like to live here and what's the cost of living and housing situation like. So here's an example from Cleveland County, North Carolina. They developed the brand Charlotte's Backyard. They're located just outside of Charlotte. They have a much lower cost of living, and they have hundreds of available manufacturing jobs right now, which is really the focus of their campaign. And this digital toolkit that they put together for employers came with the launch of their new website. And it's everything from key messages, how they can talk to talent about what it's like to live there, cost of housing and cost of living data, brochures that they can literally hand to somebody in an interview. Another thing we're seeing them doing is working directly with employers to spotlight the jobs that they're having the most difficult time filling. So when talent arrives at this website, one of the first things they'll see are these featured jobs, which are really just helping the HR reps out there trying to recruit for these jobs to fill them.
All right, so number 3, partner with tourism. Patience and I met with a group of your HR professionals from within the region this morning, and I think this recommendation or best practice was among the ones that they were most surprised by. So today's tourists are essentially tomorrow's potential talent. One of the things that you see in this little chart on the right here is one of the most helpful tools people have when considering a relocation move is the opportunity to visit. So if people visit and see Birmingham firsthand, they're much more likely to actually make the relocation move to be here. So in terms of a best practice, I want to highlight for you the state of Vermont and something that they have done called a stay-to-stay program. So Vermont is an interesting state. They're a current client of ours. They have a 2.7% unemployment rate. They have an aging population that is static. It's not growing, unlike the Birmingham region in the state of Alabama. And what they do have is they get 13 million visitors every single year. People who come to ski, people who come to hike, people who come to fish and enjoy the outdoors and that kind of thing. So what they put together was a program called Stay to Stay. What they do every other month is they have a special program for visitors to come and spend 3 days in Vermont and check it out, those who are considering relocating to Vermont. And what they get is they get to meet with companies, prospective employers. They get to do a tour of the community, a walking tour of the community. They're in 4 different communities across Vermont. They get to meet with realtors. Essentially, they get to get a sense for what it's like to live in Vermont. And this has been enormously successful. Some of the media coverage to share, and I do like the Washington Post headline, Vermont's creative approach to its labor shortage, hire the tourists. It really has been a remarkable and very successful program. And even for those tourists that come and participate in a stay-to-stay program but don't actually relocate, it still generates revenue for the state. So it's been a really good practice and good to see. For Birmingham, you have an extraordinary tourism product here. And I just think something along these lines, something to partnering with your tourism comrades at the CVB is a great opportunity here.
So I'm going to talk you through strategy number 4. And this has to do with the fact that if you can't see a location firsthand, the next best thing is hearing about it from friends and family. And many of us are connected with our friends and family these days on social media. So the Charleston region is the example I'm going to share with you now that did a really good job of capitalizing on the power of locals. So they recruited a bunch of people who work in their tech industry, which they're trying to recruit I think they're trying to fill 25,000 jobs over the next 5 years in the tech industry. So they recruited people who work in the tech industry, live in Charleston, and love it, to basically agree to share good news about Charleston on their social media. Pretty easy. So they recruited this army of digital ambassadors, we call them. And here's the program in action here. Charleston was ranked a best place for careers by Wallet Hub. An email went out to the ambassadors with news about the ranking and a ready-made social post. So our example here, Patrick Alessi was able to share this with his network, and he actually relocated from the Northeast to Charleston, so all of his friends in Boston are seeing this post. And that's all without the cost associated with digital advertising, paid social media marketing, and it has the added benefit of coming from a credible third party rather than a marketing initiative.
This particular example focuses on Twitter and includes a tweet, but it also works with LinkedIn, it also works with Facebook. It's been a very powerful and pretty low cost and efficient program as well. Number 5, customer service counts. So we did something really interesting. We called it To Catch a Coder. And it was an exercise in which we created a fictitious coder, essentially someone who is a software engineer. We said she was from New York City, her name was Liz Smith, and we had her send an email to 30 different communities around the Southeast that had talent attraction websites that basically said, we're interested in attracting people to our community. And within it, she asked some very simple questions. She asked for a list of employers that might hire her. She asked for things about housing costs. She said she's an avid cyclist, and she asked about some of the recreational opportunities. And we sent it off, and she asked for people to respond back to her. So here are the findings. Basically, of 30 communities that we sent this off to, only 8 ever responded. 22 never even acknowledged her email. Of those 8 that responded, only 4 of them actually provided useful information that related to what she asked. And finally, the last one, even though we included a phone number, even though we included a resume, no one followed up with a phone call. No one took that opportunity. So I think the point is here, if a community is going to get into the talent attraction game and start to put resources into this, it's not just about generating interest, it's about trying to convert people. One community that has started to do this is Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So they made the decision about 6 months ago to create a new position, call it a talent concierge. And all this woman that you see here, Melissa, does, her job is basically to interact with people who are considering relocating to Baton Rouge and try to facilitate that, try to get them the information they need in order to facilitate that, that kind of a relocation. So there you have it. Those are our, whoops, went too far, sorry. Those are our 5 ways to attract talent. You know, we think more best practices are going to emerge, but once again, it's early days in terms of the talent attraction game here.
So as Andy said, this is early days, and no one has solved this problem yet. It has not been solved by any one community. But we did just want to share a few of the ways in which Birmingham is ahead of the curve in this respect. So first of all, it's important to acknowledge what the rest of the country is saying about Birmingham. And the BBA and its partners have been really smart to be proactive in engaging with the national media, which we know is a big influencer in perceptions both for talent and for executives. So they've had a really proactive strategy in engaging with the media. These are just some of the results over the last year and a half or so. You know, Forbes calling them the next Southern Silicon Valley. It's really good news, and greater national awareness for Birmingham is a win for everyone, essentially, and it's great fodder for the talent attraction work that's ahead.
So in June of 2018, you came out with the Building It Together report. And this was done by an organization called Burning Glass Technologies. I see a number of heads nodding. And it basically focused on workforce development. It sort of said, how can we bring together the educational community that's excellent here with industry, with companies, and making sure that we have the best possible workforce development program. And I think this is a really, really important step in getting workforce development more fine-tuned and even working better in the Birmingham region. So that would be number 2 of our observations.
So that approach is kind of what we would call the slow cooker approach to building workforce to fill jobs. But Birmingham is also looking to fill jobs right now. And they're currently in the initial stages of a multi-year talent attraction campaign, which we're fortunate enough to get to partner with them on. And the first piece of that is foundational research, which is really, really important. Currently, we're in the process of engaging with employers. As Andy mentioned, we actually met with some HR reps this morning. A survey has gone out to stakeholders and HR reps, basically looking for strengths, potential pain points, what marketing are you currently doing, and so forth. So that piece is a really important first step. From there, Birmingham is going to look at what are the target markets we should be targeting, who is most likely to relocate here. So we'll look at in and out migration patterns, where are there concentrations of alumni, UAB is a great target for that. Where is Birmingham competitive from a cost of living perspective? And the answer is just about everywhere, which is great. So we'll be looking at that as the next piece. And finally, we'll be actually surveying talent to see what are their perceptions of Birmingham as a place to live and work right now? And that'll be a really great baseline measure for marketing efforts going forward. And ultimately, this will result in a brand to attract talent to the region, as well as a multi-channel kind of marketing strategy to begin to bring talent here and bring greater awareness of Birmingham as a place to live and work.
So we conclude by just saying thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to address this important group today. And we would love to interact with as many millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, whatever gen you're part of during the reception later on. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Brian, for inviting us.